the very fundamental ideas in fish population dynamics is what's called density dependence. And what that means is when you have a stock that's at an unusually large size, lots of times we see that the growth goes down. That's the case in haddock right now. The growth goes down. We don't know this definitely, but we suspect the mortality rates go up, the maturity schedule changes. And so, basically that's something that has to be taken into account, and it isn't.
And here's a $7 fish that's got to go back over because I can only catch 50 pounds a day. And did I mention there's a record biomass of fluke in the ocean and I can only catch 50 pounds a day? Just remember that.
We're allowed 1,000 pounds of codfish per day at sea. If we spend 10 days at sea, we're allowed to catch 10,000 pounds of codfish. It's possible to catch 10,000 pounds of codfish on your first day. If that happens, you're made to stay out for those 10 days. Whether you want to go in or not, whether the wind's going to blow 50, 60, 70 mile an hour, doesn't matter. You have to stay out for 10 days. There's a safety issue here that the National Marine Fisheries Service is supposed to take into account. It's right in the Magnuson-Stevens Act. It's one of the national standards. I think a vessel was lost last week while they were running their clock out. Wanted to go in, couldn't go in. Sitting outside, outside of the line, that they have a demarcation line that you can't cross, and basically sit there. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense.
It's a catch and release program. We spend more time trying to avoid catching fish than we do catching fish because of the mismanagement that we have to deal with.
They must lay awake nights trying to think of how they can come up with a new regulation, because it just keep dreaming them up, and most of them don't work at all. They seem to think they know what they're doing. I'm surprised because they're educated people, but they don't act like they know anything, especially about this industry here.
One of the problems with groundfish is there's 19 species of groundfish that are collectively managed together. So you have you know, certain species like haddock doing very well, and then you have other species like flounder that aren't, and the flounder drives the whole fishery. So fishermen aren't allowed, you know, they can't go out and catch the abundance of fish in one species because it's all put together. So you're fishing to the lowest, or really the toughest hit species, and you really, you know, the management system has to make a better effort to maximize the opportunities that fishermen can have in other species within the groundfish complex.
In order to do a regulation that protects a few species, if you simply try and shut down all fishing, you're going to protect, I suppose, all the species, but you're going to collapse the fishing industry.
You could really have that balance where you guys could give guys enough fish that they could survive comfortably and put a lot more fish on the market at a good price, and everyone would be better off, instead of, you know, cutting guys down where they can't possibly make it. You know, and you know, last summer is an example of guys lost money going fishing, and it's something that never happened before. They lost money and they weren't able to bring in fish that were plentiful. It's criminal.
We're not the bad guys, so all we're doing is trying to make a living, and we are feeding the public.
And that is something that the consumer just has to understand, that we fish for them.
There are a lot of issues with statistics, with how the statistics are handled, how the data is analyzed. Are people being treated fairly?
Living in a scientific age, we need citizens who know enough about science to make intelligent decisions about what they do. We've used science to prolong life, to increase security and happiness, but it can also be used for destruction.
The National Marine Fisheries Service doesn't have any business trying to manage fishermen or do research because they're completely inadequate doing it. They've proven it. They've been in charge since the Magnuson-Stevens Act went in '76. We're in the worst shape we've been, so how much more time are we going to give them to screw things up more?
There's ivory tower type of goals, and then there's realistic goals. We need to have realistic goals that take into account not laboratory type conditions, but real conditions of the ocean, the ecosystem.
I don't suppose any one man could ever learn all about every kind of fish. There are over 20,000 known and classified different kinds, each one with its own double-jointed jawbreaker of a name.
I actually believe that the ones that are regulating don't have the knowledge they need to do it.
There is nothing more fearful to me in fisheries management than a fisheries scientist with an agenda. And unfortunately, because of the circumstances and the willingness to defend what they've been doing for so long, they've fell into a trap. They're constantly defending something that's wrong.
There are an awful lot of good people in the fisheries service. Unfortunately, there are some who are so bad that it overcomes what goodness you will find.
They're not fishermen. They're scientists and bureaucrats, and they are not good at what they do.
A good example would be going around Block Island at night trying to catch yellowtails, because that's one of their survey stations. You only catch yellowtails around Block Island in daylight. When they get to that station, they fish whether it's daylight or dark. It doesn't matter. Flounder's about the same thing. You always catch more fish in the daytime, but when they go to make their survey, they'll make it when they get there. And it might be the middle of the night when you're not going to catch anything. And everybody's heard about the trawl warps being different lengths and everything, and I don't think they've ever got that straightened out. They can't use those great big boats to make these surveys and apply them to the size boats that are on the East Coast. They just don't even come up with a tenth of what a real fishing boat catches.
John, when you look at this net, you know, you've been designing and building nets for a long time. What do you see when you look at this net that is being used to drive all the science for fisheries management from National Marine Fisheries Service?
I can say unequivocally that this is the worst trawl I've ever seen. There's two distinct problems with the trawl, and one is the sudden transition from the 16-inch flat rollers in the center out to a 4-inch disc further up the wing. And as we can see in the video here, that is what's holding that entire wing of the net is held completely off the bottom. So that's one of the things. The hanging ratios between the top and bottom are not consistent, something we would never do in a trawl. And then the other thing is, and you can see here where the top and bottom section, the top wings and the bottom wings of the net, where they, what we refer to as gored together, where they're put together, the bottom meshes, the bottom of the net is 108 meshes deep twine, whereas the top of the net is only 99 meshes deep. So over the course of that length, they've got 9 meshes more. And you can see in that gore where the seams are, you can see the great big bunching because they've had to force that twine in. And it creates those incredibly distorted looking twine. It's really amazing.
So when they put the top of the net and the bottom of the net together where it meets, that's what they call a gore. And on any modern net or any net that is built properly, it should be even, the same amount of meshes.
Same amount of meshes top to bottom.
And this one isn't, creating a much
And you can just see
mismatch.
the ripples. Yeah, when you see a well-built net in the tank, that twine is perfectly smooth. You know, it's just
nice and taut the whole way down.
Nice and taut the whole way.
And in this one here, we see that it's going like an S up and down because it's mismatched and they're not equal length. The water pressure is equal when a net is taut. So if you get a pocket, you get less resistance, which is a low pressure area.
A low pressure
so
zone,
that's
right?
where the fish try to dive out because there's less pressure there. That's where they're going to go every time.
Yep.
And if you're trying to catch whiting or squid or butterfish, any kind of small to medium-sized fish, they're able to shoot right out through that loose twine.
The survey trawl hardly ever catches a monkfish.
Right.
When you look at this sweep.
When we look at the net, the center of it has 16-inch rollers, which is not meant for smooth bottom at all. And in between those, they're spaced out pretty far. In between, there's nothing. So the flatfish that are on the bottom, when the bottom of this net comes along, They can go out in between those rollers, but then the other problem is where there's no transition to go from 16-inch down to, say, 3-inch, no graduation down. It just goes from 16 to 4 or 3, whatever it is.
4-inch cookie.
4-inch. That hole from that last 16-inch roller all the way to the wing end is off the bottom 1.5 feet because there's no transition to work it down. So basically you've lost 2/3 of the fishing area of the net because it has no contact with the bottom.
Yeah, yeah, it is, yeah. No.
So, I mean, if this is supposed to be our modern science generating fisheries data and population densities and like that, I mean, it's an ineffective tool. It's broken. I know when they were scupping with this net, they used this net right aside of an industry boat, the Jason and Danielle. They both towed for 30 minutes. The Jason and Danielle had 30,000 pounds of scup, and the NOAA boat, National Marine Fisheries Service boat, with this net that they used had 300.
Yeah.
And they could not believe that the other boat had 30,000 right next to them. We hear them towing these nets around at 3.8 knots, 3.6 knots is another flaw in trying to catch flatfish with it.
Anybody that was using this net was most likely towing 2.5 knots, maybe 2.8 or something like that. But after that point, the net will totally lose shape and collapse. After about 2.6, 2.8, she just totally collapses and becomes very, very, very unstable. You cannot predict where that net's going to be at any given time.
The NEMAP survey with Jimmy Rule and the Darna R in the University of William and Mary is catching a lot more fish, towing the same net, the same doors, which just goes right back to what you said. Gear designed for a certain horsepower.
It has to be a fight.
It has, right, and it cannot be put on a big boat that should have gear 5 times as big as what Jimmy's towing because of the horsepower. For a government agency that has an endless supply of money, how do you justify even using an instrument that is so poor and so bad as this, and then defend it until you're blue in the face?